Hi there, I'm Conor McCreery, the co-creator and writer of Fela, Music is the Weapon, as well as Kill Shakespeare, The Last Witch, Assassin's Creed, and a bunch more comics you probably love. You can find me on X at Conor McCreery or on Instagram at The Real Conor. You can also find me at killshakespeare.com, and you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Hi, my name is Jibola, and I'm the co-creator of Fela Music is a Weapon. And you can find me on Instagram at Jibola Studios, or you can go to my website at jibolastudios.com. For the graphic novel, check out felagraphicnovel.com. And you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by co-authors of an incredible graphic novel that you have not read yet, but you should. It's called Fela, Music is the Weapon, about the amazing life of Fela Kuti, a Nigerian-born activist and singer and musician, and just an incredible overall legacy. But we're joined by the ever-talented Conor McCreery, who is a writer on this, as well as the co-author, and
Jibola Fagbamiye.
We're joined by, of course, the co-author and artist of this amazing book, Jibola. Thanks so much for you both coming on the show, and this is Jibola's first time as well, too, so thank you both so much.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks for having us.
Tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking today.
Sure. So my name is Jibola Fagbamiye, and I'm an artist based in Toronto, but I grew up in Nigeria. I've been working with Conor on this graphic novel, Fela Music is the Weapon, for over 10 years now, and it's finally coming out. It's going to be published through Harper Collins. If you don't know who Fela is a Nigerian musician who created his own genre of music called Afrobeat. I think a good comparison would be the Bob Marley of Africa, right? What makes Fela's story interesting is that he was arrested over 200 times. He married 27 women in one day, and he created his own country. He also ran for president of Nigeria. He was such a huge rebel. The Nigerian government, which was a pre-fascistic military government at the time, sent over 1,000 soldiers to his house to silence him, and they beat him up, threw his mom out of the window, burnt down his house, sexually assaulted his wives, and they took him to prison, right? And 30 days later, he came back on stage in crutches with saxophone in one hand, weed on the other hand, and said, "Can't stop, won't stop. You can't silence me. I didn't stutter," and sang the song that made them do that all over again. And the song is called Zombie. So it's a really fascinating story. It really introduces you and gives you an insight into Nigeria and West Africa in ways that we don't get in this part of the world. And if you're someone who's interested in culture, in history, and you want to know a little bit more about the world around us, this will be really enjoyable for you. And yeah, so that's what the project's all about.
I'm Conor McCreery, probably first known for a series I used to do with Anthony Delcall called Kill Shakespeare. I've also written for Assassin's Creed, Adventure Time, regular show. I have a creator-owned series called The Last Witch, which is sort of a dark all-ages fantasy adventure story. And I also worked on the Sherlock Holmes versus Harry Houdini series. And yeah, I mean, Jibola kind of really summed up what the book is getting at. It's really like a classic music biopic. If you love that kind of format, finding out what caused someone to become a musician, where their influences came from, the key moments in their career that could have sent them either way. That's what we're trying to do. And we're just, we're trying to make a story that is fun. It definitely does talk about some important things. Fela was somebody who talked a lot about really just the gap between the vast majority of us and then that small group of the very wealthy and the very powerful, whose really their only interest in us is basically, how much are you buying from me and how cheaply can I get you to work for me? Fela was decrying that, not just in Nigeria, not just in Africa, but how that was affecting all of us, not just the colonization of places like Africa, but the way corporations colonize all of us in terms of really in many ways controlling so many decisions that we're only really half aware of. From that perspective, I think we both think it's a book that is very timely. Unfortunately, also because Fela was fighting totalitarian governments, and we are seeing, a rise of authoritarianism. We only have to look south of the border at our neighbors there to see how much and how quickly things can change. And so, yeah, it's a timely book, but it's a lot of fun. It may have heavy themes, but it is something you're going to pick up and you're really going to enjoy reading.
Writing a biography of someone as complex as Fela is a massive undertaking. What was your research process with this? Was there like a book or an album or an interview that just became that cornerstone just to nail his voice?
So when I started the project, Jibola had already been working on it. We'll probably talk about this a little bit more, but Jibola had wanted to do a story about Fela, really focusing on this major attack on Fela's commune, and using that as this sort of way to explore who is this guy Fela? Why did the government need to silence him so badly? They literally sent 1,000 soldiers to do the job. And so Jibola had done a ton of research before him and I started talking about the project. Originally, he just asked me to just give him some notes on what he was doing. And I did that. And we talked a little bit about the idea that Fela's life was so huge. He gave me all this research. His life was so huge and he had so many incredible stories, but he's also not super well known in sort of North America. And I just kind of said to him, hey man, I think it's such a cool idea you have, but I think it's really like a really niche audience, because unless you know who Fela is, it might be hard to get into this. And maybe it's easier to sort of just say, what if we just did the classic biopic? Eventually Jibola kind of went away and thought about that, and he came back and he asked me if I wanted to work with him on it. So a lot of the research was me basically just taking what Jibola had already done and kind of going through and diving through for what stories I like. There's a great documentary on Fela called Finding Fela, which is really well worth a watch. There's a Broadway show based on Fela's life. I would say for me, if I had to say, there's a book called This Bitch of a Life by Carlos Moore, which is where Carlos Moore, who was a kind of an embedded journalist, and so he was watching and recording what Fela was saying. And that was really useful because it gave you a lot of a sense of how Fela spoke. But for me, the book that I kept turning back to over and over again was a book by a guy by the name of Michael Veal, who's a professor of music. So he was studying, it's called Fela, Life and Times of an African Icon. And he was not only giving you the history of Fela in the context of what was going on in Nigeria, but he would break down the lyrics, he would break down how Fela used music. And for me, that was really incredible. It was just such a perfect combo of here's so much like meticulously researched history, as well as here's just such a deep understanding of the musicology of what made Fela great. That was the big one. And then you look for every scrap, it'd be crazy. Every once in a while, I'd have a Google alert and something would come up, and some article that had been out for, 30 years for some reason had just been, I don't know, reaggregated or something. And all of a sudden I'm reading about, this legendary punk journalist at one of Fela's shrines when there was a second attack on it. And I was like, holy crap, I didn't realize there were 2 attacks. And so it just gave us all these little pieces that we were able to hopefully weave through the book in a way that makes it really interesting and surprising, but also something that you can follow pretty easily.
Sorry, Jibola, I didn't realize that you did a good chunk of that research. Talk to me about that process from your perspective, especially being Nigerian-born, and now you're in Canada trying to bring forth the legacy that is Fela.
Yeah, thank you. Like I said earlier, I grew up in Nigeria. I actually went to high school in Lagos, and my aunt's house was only a few minutes away from Fela's house, right? So whenever I would walk home, I would walk past in front of Calcutta, and I would be afraid because of all the stories you would have heard about Fela at the time, right? So I was already sort of fascinated by Fela, but I had never really listened to his songs until, when I was like 14 or 15. And the first song I heard was Beast of No Nation. I got more fascinated about Fela. Fast forward to 2007, 2008, I read This Bitch of a Life by Carlos Moore. And that was when I got the bug, when I was like, everybody needs to know the story. I need to tell the story somehow. It gave a very different insight into West Africa and Nigeria in a way that I had never seen before. And then I saw this play not too long after that called Fela on Broadway. right? And it was beautifully done. It was directed by B.T. Jones. I saw it over 5 or 6 times. I became convinced that I was going to do a project, a graphic novel on Fela, because graphic novels allows you to tell the stories in ways that you can't do on film or in theater, right? I started working on it and I was convinced I could write a better story than the one on Broadway, right? Of course,
Sure.
And then very soon realized, oh, I don't have the chops to write this thing. I had illustrated, I had read a ton of books, a ton of articles, but I just didn't quite know where to take it.
Yeah.
So I had chunks of stories here and there that didn't quite connect, right? And I had met Connor years before, and I reached out to him. I was like, hey, man, I need some help with this. He took it away. I told him my plan was to write maybe about 80 to 100 pages, nothing too crazy. Connor was like, all right, cool, no problem. So he went away, thought about it. At first, he gave me a couple of notes. I was like, oh man, he knew more about Fela than I initially thought, actually. So he came with very detailed, thought out notes, not so much technical writing corrections or anything. So I was like, hey man, do you want us to work on this project together? And it was like, yeah, he thought about it and decided for us to work together. And then he went away to put together what the script would look like something really rough. And homie came back with 350 pages. And I was like,
Surprise!
what are you doing? I'm not drawing 350 pages. And we went back and forth. My mission was to cut it in half. But the more I read it, I was like, man, this is so good. There's nothing to cut here. We met with a publisher. And I remember Connor saying this. Like, I just remember this right now. He's like, you know what? You know what's going to happen? When we talk to the editor, they're going to cut it in half anyway. And I was like, oh, okay, that's true. I don't know what to cut. I'm not a writer. The publisher added more pages.
Oh, no.
And I was like, okay.
Wow.
that didn't work. So that's sort of like the story. But I think the beauty of what happened was I was really glad that Connor did that because he brought so much to the story. He had so much respect and love for the story and brought different perspectives that I had overlooked just because, I come with the bias of I'm Nigerian, people know these things, but no, people don't, right? So some things I would have taken for granted, he found very interesting. So we were able to play off each other really well and tell this really beautiful story that I think the world should see.
It's funny because I was having lunch with my dad, and he's a big proponent. He likes R&B and rap and just everything in general. And as soon as I said, yeah, I'm doing an interview with the co-creators of this Fela Music is the Weapon graphic novel, he's like, Fela Kuti? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, oh, I love him. He's amazing. You really got to listen to his stuff. And like he put me on to a lot of his songs and his albums, and I was just like, okay, here's something new that I had never absolutely heard before. And the flow, the rhythm, it's just powerful from start to finish. And it is just something that, like you said, people in North America just don't really know about unless they've invested themselves into it. And I'm glad that you both are bringing this to the table here.
Yeah, absolutely.
The fact that the publisher added more pages onto it here, as an artist yourself here, Jibola, like that's got to have been a massive undertaking. Drawing a full graphic novel, that was a marathon from a creative perspective here. What was your routine regarding that work ethic and that work environment to try to maintain consistency and quality over the long haul for this graphic novel?
That's a great question. So I want to contextualize it a bit, right? If you remember 2020, we had a global pandemic. I don't know if you remember. My wife had just had a baby. We're moving apartments. We just got this mission to draw this 350-page graphic novel. I'd never done anything like that before. The most I had done was a 44-page comic that I did in 2008. That was just kind of like a personal project. It was black and white. And this one was full color. The plan, self-imposed, but let the art evolve as the story evolved. The Fela was ever changing through the story. The different characters and the different time was changing to reflect the 70s, to reflect like the 70s, the 90s to reflect on the 90s, right? So it was just a lot more challenging, right? Initially, I was going to draw everything paper and pencil. The first 10 pages were drawn on paper and pencil, and I realized that was taking way too long. What I ended up doing was I'm going to just sketch out all 360 pages in one shot. I'll just take 2 months to just get it all out. And the goal was to do 10 pages a day. It was really low fidelity stuff, so just banging out the pages. I'll read out the script and just draw it out. And then once we had all 360 or so pages done, Connor and I would sit together and discuss it a bit more in detail and go, all right, given the script and given what we sketched out here, how do we refine this a little bit better? We would agree on it. We'll refine the script as well. At the time, I would refine my drawing. And then, Connor would go away, do his thing. I'll go away to do more of the illustration. Once I finished rendering, I did everything digitally. So inked it digitally. And then I would block out all the colors, just a color palette of what the page would feel like. And I was able to recruit two different artists. One in Nigeria, his name is Jibola, and this other girl in LA called Ashley too. We're all into the different time zones, and we all had different art styles and different coloring styles. But it needed to mesh and feel consistent. But I also wanted it to change. I wanted them to keep that individuality. I wanted to have my own individuality. So I'll give them instructions. They'll go to town. Once they came back with the final colors on their side, I'll take it away and just polish it to my liking and then call it done.
Nice.
So that was kind of like the technical process of it.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah. Time zones are a pain. Trust me, I know, interviewing people in like the Philippines, and it's a 12-hour difference or whatever. You do what you can just to make sure the craft and the creativity flows properly. And I'm glad you had a wonderful workflow when it came to that, for sure. It's a question for both of you, though. At the very beginning, what was the non-negotiable principle that you both agreed upon for this project?
Oh, it was definitely the length. We both agreed that it had to be 365 pages. And Jibola really came on board really quickly. He was like, man, I don't mind drawing that much. In fact, I think it's a sharper and a better artist.
Sure.
That's an interesting question. I mean, Jibola, I don't know, maybe you've got a different take on this, but I don't really remember anything where we were like some specific thing where we're like, we have to make sure we tell this part of the story, or I think we just kind of had a mutual commitment to wanting to honor Fela. And by that, I mean like really honor the totality of him, to not hide the complicated parts, to not shy away from all the different facets of his personality. Like, we didn't want to make him this kind of boring, bland hero who's standing up against the bad guys, like, which is, of course, he did stand up against totalitarianism and against, people who were using power to grind down individuals. But, he was so much more than that. And I think, Jibola talks about this, so I'll steal this point from him, but he talks a lot about how often, the story of Africans or Black Americans is one of like overcoming, survival of the struggle, of this ability to just keep moving forward. And while that is, of course, very, very true, it also really flattens the totality of the experience of being African or being a Black American or being part of the Black diaspora. And so we really wanted we wanted you to be able to see every corner of Fela's life, to see what his joys look like, what his frustrations look like. And so that it was more than just a story of this guy fighting and overcoming. This was a story about how he loved and who he loved and what his sense of humor was and why he took all his interviews on the toilet. Like, we wanted to just really give you this full example of who he was. And so, yeah, I would say, to me, that was just the one thing, is we didn't want to sanitize everything, and we wanted it to be as kind of quirky and as unusual a book as Fela was a person.
Yeah, that's a really spot on one. I think for me, there were a couple of rules. They were mostly for myself too, that I sort of imposed on Connor, but he didn't know that I imposed it on him. But I think the first one was just that it needed to be a lot of fun and for people to really enjoy reading it, but also feeling the story and feeling like they're part of this journey, Alice in Wonderland. And we wanted from the minute you open the book, you feel like, oh, this is a totally new experience, right? As an artist, I really challenge myself to make sure that each panel, and Connor really did, he always checked me on when I would go like, oh, maybe this panel should be, yeah, I don't have to spend too much time on this panel. And he would go like, no, I think maybe you missed something here. I'll go like, God damn it, man. And then, yeah, I'll go back and fix it. Each panel and each page, I wanted it to feel artistically rich and for you to feel like you're almost in a museum or in an art gallery experiencing this creative artistic expression. And just like Fela's song, the music should, the art and the story should evolve with you, right? So that it feels like it's not disconnected from the subject we're talking about. It's one and the same, you know. So those were just some of the rules.
Didn't know you were cornered there, Connor, until the very end.
Yeah, are you secret rule? I feel betrayed.
But the book's going to be amazing, so I guess it doesn't matter, right?
I'm in the Matrix now. I'm in the Matrix.
You know, Connor, when it comes to your biggest creative moment or low moment when it came to this particular project, where self-doubt obviously can creep in, especially if you're working on a long series like this here with an amazing co-author, what was your thought process and action you thought to break through any low points in terms of writing this book?
You know what? It's funny. I didn't really have one in this project, which is weird given how long it took, right? I mean, Jibola and I probably worked on this. You're talking about kind of when we first sat down and started, when he first sat down with me and I went away and started to think seriously about what this story could potentially be. I think we worked on it for 7.5, 8 years or something like that. But I think part of it is having just a great partner, even if I was, you know, trapped in a maze of rules that I had no idea even existed. But no, part of it's having a great partner. Like Jibola is wonderful, right? Like he's always got a smile on his face. He's a happy dude. Like he doesn't like get frustrated very easily. And when he is frustrated, he's just very like upfront about it. So like working with him is a real joy. So there was none of that for sure. I mean, I've been lucky mostly in my career. I pretty much generally work with people who are wonderful, but Jibola's kind of really takes the crown. And I think because we had researched it so much, and in a weird way, because it is a biopic, right? I would say it has more in common with like a film biography than it would like a straight documentary.
Right.
So that, you know, there was some creation involved on our part, but really, you know, you're kind of following the roadmap of reality. And so that helped a lot, right? At least for me, there wasn't the sense of like, oh my gosh, where should the story go now? You know, I mean, a lot of times I write down, well, this could happen, that could happen. You can get paralyzed by that. Where there was no like, oh, like what if Fela did this or what if he did that? It's like, well, no, he did do this and he did do that. And so the question is just, do we show that chronologically as it actually happened? Do we mess with that a little bit because it's going to make it easier for people to understand? It'll make the story move more smoothly. So those challenges, I wouldn't say they cause like a lot of like, you know, angst or existential like pain. It was really just kind of getting down to brass tanks and really just cranking and trying to figure it out. I would say that after everything was said and done was probably where all the angst came. There was a long delay after we delivered the book to Harper Collins. We delivered it to Amistad as the publisher. It's an imprint there, and it's only the second graphic novel they've done. And Jibola was talking earlier about how, you know, I delivered this very long script. And, you know, I was very prepared for them to come back and say, okay, like this is great. It's 350 pages. It's all beautiful, blah, 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 blah. But we're not doing a 350-page book, right? It's going to cost too much. So we're going to have to cut. I think it's the prose element of them. You know, prose editors obviously cut things if they don't make sense. But like they're not sitting there like a comics editor might be saying, well, you know, each page is so expensive because of the color and the special type of paper you need to use and everything else. They didn't come back and cut anything because I think, you know, the story does read very tightly to Jibola and my credit. So after we delivered it, there was actually a long period where we didn't hear anything. And I did start getting a little nervous about the idea of, had somebody in like the accounting department been running a P&L statement and was like, how the crap do you think we're going to sell this book and make any money? Like it's 350 pages. Like, what are you what are you guys doing? So that was a little dread. And then lately there has been, I have to tiptoe around it a teeny bit, but there's been a little bit of dread because I'll give an example. There was a profile for the book that was going to be going out in a pretty high profile publication, online publication, that focuses on the African diaspora. And they did this great interview with Jibola, and they were very excited, and they were like really hyped about this book. Like all their people would be so excited, this like love letter to Africa and to Nigeria and to Fela. And then a few days before it was due to get posted, we got a message from that outlet saying, we're killing the story. And somebody behind the scenes had told them to kill the story. But I'm being a little cagey here, but there has been a little bit in the last over the summer of just realizing that not everybody, for various reasons, is as excited about this book as we are. And so that I would say has caused more of the void for us in just being like, oh man, like have we done all this work and it's like maybe for nothing? I feel like I was able to handle that a bit better because I've just spent enough time in the comics trenches where like anybody who's worked long enough in comics, you know that all of a sudden you have something that was either approved and then got killed or was done and got killed. Like it just happens. And so you just kind of like take your punch in the face and walk on. Maybe Jibola can better elucidate his feelings over all that. But I feel like there's a little bit of, Kurt, you may remember last time we were talking about that song Jumper.
Oh, yeah.
There was a little bit of that. I wish you would get off that ledge, my friend, you know, because there's a couple times where I was like, oh, Jibola might not make it. Like, if this book comes out, he might not be there for it. So, yeah, there we go.
For some reason, I was like, oh, this book is never going to come out. Like, it's the most traumatic experience, I would say, was not making the book. I would say it was difficult, but it was the easy part. I remember we had sized the book a certain way, and then we designed it for 9x11 or 9x12, something like that. And I remember at the beginning asking, hey, what are the dimensions? And they were like, dude, just pick the one you want. I was like, all right, cool, bet. I'll go with this really awesome size that I like, right? And then a year later, we both moved on with our lives. We both had new projects. And then we got this message, hey man, can you change the size to this? I was like, what do you mean change the size? There's no change in the size. The size is the size. They're like, no, it's too big. We need to reduce the dimensions. I'm like, that means I have to redraw, I have to redesign the whole page, the whole book. They're like, yeah. I'm like, okay. So I think that was the most painful, I think, Obviously, there's all this drama that's happening behind the scenes as well, with stories getting pulled. And then also just the promotion part of it is challenging. I'm new to this world and talking about it. But yeah, other than that, it's actually been great.
I can't shrink down Fela's legacy into a 4x6 or whatever you want me to do. He needs to be on a 9x12. Come on.
Right? Like, what is this?
That just feels like you're crushing the creativity, as well as the art size.
I think that was in the end, that was the accounting department coming in and being like, so you want to do this many pages? Okay, like, but we're doing it this size. At which point I did not feel bad. We're at like the very last moment, Jibola and I had one last idea, which I think ended up actually being pretty important, but it seemed very minor. But there's an ongoing motif of like the Yoruba dream world. So when you actually open this book, you don't start in the here and now. You don't actually start in the real world. You start in this dream world. It's important for a bunch of different reasons, partially because of Fela's belief in African spiritualism, partially because we wanted to explore and introduce people to the African mythology, or specifically the Yoruba mythology, because obviously it's not African, it's very from a specific part of the continent. We actually realized we hadn't really tied that element off completely, and there's a motif of a butterfly that kind of runs through this. And so really close to the very end, we've been getting, the only bit of negative feedback we got was from people saying there's this kind of abrupt transition near the end of the book. And I won't say to what, because it is a bit of a spoiler. And so then Jibola and I were like, should we write like a few more pages? Which is funny because now Jibola was like, well, we got to do more pages. I'm like, Ah, my son. But yeah, you've learned so well, But we ended up deciding we were just going to do this one double page spread.
Mm.
And it was like really the last minute. And I was just like, let's just do it and then just deliver it to them and tell them it needs to be in the book. And so we did do that. And to their credit, I think they were kind of like, what the heck? But they did. They threw it in. So I didn't feel bad after they shrunk the book down to throw in, two last pages at the last moment. But I do actually feel like it made a significant difference and it really aided a final transition. And it also added a real moment of beauty and joy to the book. That was a moment of just being like, oh, we're just going to deliver these pages and see what they do. And thankfully, they were like, sure, fine, whatever. We just want this book off our schedule.
Right. Well, we definitely drove them a little crazy when we had to resize the whole book. Actually, also give us a chance to go through some of the pages again and go, like, oh, you know what, we could actually fix this here and there, and you could tinker around the edges. And honestly, at the end of the day, I felt the book became better, because of all these things that happened. And we ended up delivering a better product. And now, when I have the book in my hand, unfortunately, I don't have it right here with me. I'm actually glad that the current size, it feels like the right size. So,
And to be clear, as much as
yeah,
we're like the people at Harper Collins have been incredible in this book. The people of Amistad have been
amazing,
incredible.
amazing,
They
amazing.
have
Yeah,
we've had
yeah,
such a great editorial team working behind us. We have had so much fun working with the production team. I think they would also be like, oh yeah, like that change kind of surprised us too.
it
We've
did.
been
It did
really
surprise
fortunate.
them.
We've been
Yeah,
really fortunate to work with a great team of people who had not done a lot of work with graphic novels before. And I'd like to think that hopefully we maybe opened a door because I think a lot of people were just blown away by what graphic novels could do. There were definitely people in that office who had read graphic novels, were very aware of them, but I think there were some people who maybe had their eyes open to the idea that, oh, it's not a genre, it's a medium,
Mm.
and you can tell any story you want in the medium, and that's cool. Maybe I'm projecting, but I think that might be kind of true. So that's kind of cool too, is to be like, oh man, I think that's a bigger goal for us for the book is for people out there who don't read graphic novels or maybe only read one a year, like this is that book, or give that to a friend of yours who is kind of a snob about comics
Mhm.
and is like, they're nice about it, but you're like, yeah, I know you don't get it. Like this is the kind of book you could hand to them for them to be like, oh, oh, and then like, do other graphic novels do this? And then you're gonna have your list and
Yeah.
just be like, all right, let's get reading because I've got so many I've wanted to share with you. We're hoping it can be kind of like Kill Shakespeare was years ago, was
Yeah.
a book that got people into comics.
Yeah. And that's the one thing I love about graphic novels is the fact that it doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter your gender, it doesn't matter anything like that. If you find a story that you can gravitate towards as a reader, whether you know about graphic novels or comics or not, if you enjoy the story, if you enjoy the art or the writing or whatever it is that draws you into that book, a good cover always helps, obviously. You're going to be a lifelong reader and you won't be on the streets in terms of, taking drugs. So you'll have no money for drugs because you'll be buying graphic novels.
Comics, keeping you from heroin because you just don't have the money.
Exactly. Well, as a Nigerian artist telling this story, there must have been some immense pressure to get it right. How did you manage the psychological weight of that responsibility? And did it ever become paralyzing?
I don't think it was ever paralyzing. The thing about Nigerians is that if you get it wrong, they're gonna roast you. Like, they're never gonna hold back, right? So I kind of went in there just going like, okay, if you tell a story that is funny, that is raw and real, I think people would just get it and go, okay, this guy is not bullshitting me. The biggest thing I wanted to make sure we were doing was that it was authentic, right? And there's stories in there that are just uniquely Nigerian. And I say that because whenever I tell stories about things that happened to me in Nigeria, people are like, oh shit, like that actually happened. And you're like, yeah, it did. Like Connor and I were speaking at a different show yesterday, and he told a story that was really funny and unique. And you're like, yeah, like those things happen. It just, when Nigerian or stories about Africa are told here, it's just told from this really weird, flat, paternalistic view that you're just like, what? That's not the experience. So as long as we were not doing that, I think we were good. There's this story in the book where Fela has been, him and his good friend JK were chased by police officers and they had to hide in the bushes and they got soldier ants. That story actually happened to me and a friend of mine, right? We kind of weave that into the story because it's such a funny story. By the time when it was happening, it was not funny, you know. Someone had attempted to steal my car. My friend and I had run into the bushes and hid there, and I was wearing this red shirt. So it was the brightest thing. And we hid there for hours and hours. We were getting bit by soldier ants. And then when we came back out, those guys were gone and we were able to drive away and everything. We tie that into the story. And when Nigerians or West Africans will read that story, they'll go like, oh shit, yeah, like that's something that would happen. And the other thing is like, Fela is such a huge force in Nigeria. He's almost a deity. Over 1 million Nigerians came to honor Fela when he passed away. And I think the only other people that received that kind of honor is Pope John Paul or Mandela had that, Princess Diana had that, and also Fela. Every year, people all over the world celebrate Fela's birthday, right? For instance, on Saturday, I'm meeting a friend of mine who does a celebration in Tokyo, right? It's its own thing, As long as we were making sure that we're celebrating Fela and respecting the gravity of who he is and what he represented, I didn't think too much about holding myself back creatively.
Have you both been in contact with Fela Kuti's family in regards to this? Like, if Fela were alive and able to read this graphic novel, what single question are you most nervous or excited to hear him ask about it?
What question would Fela ask? I mean,
that's a tough question.
Okay. So, I do feel, obviously we're biased, but I feel like he'd be impressed. I think Fela was really impressed by people who were up to things. I think people who were trying to influence the world and trying to do something important were things that he was drawn to. And so I think by virtue of trying to boost the presence of what his message was, I think the mere fact that we were interested in his message, like what it really was, I think that would be something where he'd be like, okay, like you guys are cool, right? Like you get it, right? I think obviously, when you're a superstar the size that Fela is, you have an ego. Fela definitely did have an ego. I think he would probably be pleased that it was a 365-page book. Like, is this the longest book on any musician? Is this the longest graphic novel on any musician in history? It might be. I think he would be pretty like, oh, how long was that Martin Luther King graphic novel biography? Okay, I'm longer, good. Right? I feel like there would be some joy for that. I'm sure there would be some nitpicky stuff where he would be like, no, no, no. I don't know. I'm trying to think what he would. I think probably he would maybe ask why we didn't dive deeper and spend more time in the nuts and bolts of his creation of music, his rehearsal process, how he composed, how he put bands together. And I think the answer for that for us would just be like, this was the one limit that graphic novels gave us. We can't play with sound. And so we do have scenes where we have performance and we have nothing but music for 3 or 4 pages at a time. And for us, I think that was a line we were like, you know what? It's hard to really do justice to the incredible process that he had. They performed all these songs live in practices. Anybody could come and watch. People could make comments. Like, it was this really interesting. It wasn't collaborative because Fela had such a clear vision of what he wanted, but it was uniquely communal. And so I think he might question sort of why he would do that. And as far as the family, we didn't really have any specific conversations with them ahead of time, partially because we really wanted to be able to tell the story through our eyes. At the end of the day, while we are telling Fela's stories, it is still a story from Jibola and I. It is still how Fela has touched us and how his words and his actions, why we think they're important. And so we wanted to be able to have that kind of independence. But we definitely hope that once the book is out, on October 7th, that, we'll be able to get a copy into the family's hands, that they'll be able to see what we did. And we hope they would see it as we intended it, which is as a love letter to Fela and to everything he's accomplished.
I think, like Conor said, most of it there. The one thing to also remember is that Fela's family is not a monolith, right? You have Fela's daughter who has been a champion, pushing Fela's name and celebrating Fela, getting the word out there and evangelizing about. You have Femi, who has also created his own version of Fela's Afrobeat, making it a lot more known and accessible to the world. He just finished a world tour that was pretty amazing. You have Shaun, who, if you want to figure out what Fela would say today on any issue, you could just go to Bird's Eye View and listen to Shaun, and he's the voice of Fela today, right? And you have a more of a private son, Ole, as well, who kind of runs the museum. They express Fela very differently. And you also have Nade, who's Femi's son, who's Fela's grandson, who's also creating this new, interesting version of Afrobeat, also beautiful. Yes, we didn't connect with any of the family, but we hope that when they do get a copy of the book and they read it, we hope that they feel that we really did a good job representing Fela, you know. And then the other thing about your initial question, we all exist in different planes, right? Like, there's a way I see myself, right? There's a way that you see me, and there's also the way I would like to be seen, like a holy trinity, Fela, the way we've sort of painted this picture of him is he's almost reached this self-actualization level, understanding who he is. And that's why he's so fearless and was just able to stand 10 toes down all the time in the face of extreme danger, right, to himself and to the people around him. Sometimes I wonder, like, how did he feel? This is how we see him, but like, how did he feel himself, like the human fella? And we were able to just sort of project what we think he would feel. I think maybe the only thing I would be nervous if Fela was alive was like, well, that's not actually how I felt, or like if there was an inconsistency there. But just based on everything we've read and all the research we've done, I hope that we were as close to it as possible to what the true Fela says.
If you could distill one life philosophy or business lesson from Fela's story that you've applied to your own creative career, what would it be?
If you look at Fela's life, right, started with jazz, right, and then he moved into high life, and then eventually to Afrobeat. The Afrobeat sound sort of evolved when he kind of got the right ingredients of what he wanted to champion. What that teaches me is that he was constantly learning and iterating and growing. Even when he became a superstar, he was never stagnant. He was always growing. And that's something I've sort of incorporated into my life and what I've learned as professional in what I do and as an artist, to not pigeonhole myself but to being this just a specific type of artist. Just I want to continue growing, continue learning, continue to contribute to different ways of expressing myself artistically.
Oh, it's really nice, Jibola. I'm sitting here going like, do I have the like depth of self like awareness to really be taking lessons? No, I mean, I think like one thing that pops to mind is just the fact that Fela, he didn't care about the consequences. He was pretty fearless. He was fortunate enough to come from a middle class family. He knew he had a leg up. He was aware of the privilege that he had. And I think one of the things I really appreciate about him, and actually kind of reminds me of my dad, was just he didn't let his own personal privilege blind him to the realities of the world around him. I think it's very easy. And it's not just, people work hard, right? People who are successful work hard. Even people who started, quote unquote, on third base. Well, most of those people are working really hard to get what they want, right? I'm not trying to sit here and be like, oh, if you were born into privilege, everything was easy. It's not true, but it is easier. There's that whole idea of like internal resources and external resources. Internal resources being, who you are as a person, your drive, your intelligence, creativity, and external resources are like, what did you start with? Who do you know? What access do you get? And I think Fela was just had this unique ability to both be aware of how hard he worked, of what he created. He created something absolutely incredible, and yet very clearly aware of the fact that he might have made it no matter what, but that a lot of people who could have been quite successful but they didn't start with the external resources necessary, and so they kind of fell by the wayside. And I really appreciate the fact that as he moved into a position of being an elite, because he really was. I mean, he was arguably the most famous man in Africa for quite some time. He never left Nigeria, right? He stayed in the same neighborhood. He stayed with his people. He fought for his people, and he was just so clear on this idea that he wanted everybody to have this better life, not just the chosen few. And I really respect that. I mean, I think Jibola, you were the one who kind of brought that point to me of like, yeah, he never left. And he could have left. He could have left so many times. It would have been better for his career. It would have made him more money. He could have told himself he would have been able to do even more good because he would have had a bigger platform. And who knows, that could have even been true. But he was just determined to just be with his people and to use the privilege that he had been given and the privilege he had earned to just help those around him. It's just at the core, and I think it's why, if you read the book, you're going to find out that sometimes Fela can be absolutely maddening. He can have ridiculous opinions. He can be stubborn as a goat. Going back to Jibola's animal reference, right? He can be arrogant and cruel sometimes. But I think the reason why people stayed with him is because he did have this unshakable love for humanity. And that's inspiring. And I think sometimes it's easy to sort of, especially in these fractured times, it's really easy to want to start hating people. And I just don't think it's particularly productive. It doesn't mean you don't call people to account. It doesn't mean you don't fight for what you believe in. But I think as soon as you start really looking, especially as a lefty, and I'm a lefty, like if the whole message is we want to have a more tolerant, inclusive world, then you got to try to live that, and you got to try to have little wins when you can, and you got to have good faith negotiations and conversations with anybody who's willing to have them with you. And I think we did imagine a scene where Fela and the prime antagonist in the book, which is a general Obasanjo, who's a real person, but we kind of made him a composite character of all these different military generals to make things a little simpler. And we did have this conversation where the two of them are talking. And it was important for both Jibola and I not only to give the antagonist a real clear point of view, like this man, even though he's the enemy, is actually in his way trying to do what he thinks is best for Nigeria. Like we both were like, we believe that about Obasanjo. But it was also important for us that Fela would actually engage with him in a real conversation. And it falls to pieces because they're just too far apart in terms of what they believe the future should look like. But we both really believe that, yeah, Fela would have sat down and talked to him. He would have thought he would have got in thinking he was an idiot, and he would have been, in his mind, proven right, but he would have had a real conversation about it. And I think that's powerful. And I think that's important.
Everyone has one person that inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
I would say it's this artist called Lemmy Garioku. And so Lemmy was the artist that did Fela's jackets and album covers. People call him the king of king of albums, or king of covers. That's what it was, right? And his art style is very similar to mine, where it's a collage of different imagery and having very specific messaging in his work. And he's one of the first people to inspire me in the sense that I realized I could tell so many stories just from one image.
Nice, like that. From a professional standpoint, you are a successful artist, and you have gotten into the graphic novel scene with an amazing book, of course, Fela, Music is the Weapon. So from a professional standpoint, you're successful. Do you consider yourself personally successful?
Oh, that's a tough question. I don't know if I measure myself that way. I think one of my weaknesses is that I don't take the time to celebrate my wins. When it happens, I just go, great, that's awesome, and then I move on to the next mission. I remember last week I got the first copy of the graphic novel, and my vision of what I thought would happen was I'd be so happy, I would pop a champagne and all of that. And I just felt satisfied. I was like, all right, we did it. I gave my wife a high five, gave my son a hug, And I was like, okay, we'll do the lunch party. You know, we have a couple of book events lined up, but you know, I'm actually looking forward to my next project at this point. You know, so mm, yeah, I never see myself as successful. I just, you know, just kind of see myself as someone that's constantly trying to learn and try to grow and trying to understand the world a little bit more.
Like that. That's awesome. The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
I curl into a ball and cry. Um, you know, I try to just treat them more as learnings. I remember growing up, I used to take failures really, really hard as personal shortcomings. Like, oh, there's something wrong with me when for failing, right? And over the years, I've come to realize, oh, it's just, you know, maybe I screwed up something, or oh, I could have done this better or that better. So I just readjust and just keep moving, you know? That's kind of how I typically take failures. Sometimes they hurt, sometimes it feels heavy, but you know, I try not to spend too much time in that place. I try to just keep it going, you know?
The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own way. And the fact that you have the younger generation with you, with your son, maybe you're inspiring him down a creative path in some way, shape, or form. Well, time will tell.
Time will tell.
How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
I would say um being you, this is gonna sound cheese, man, but being true to yourself, you know, really trying to find what you're really, especially these days with automation and AI, just being finding what you really want to do and what you want to contribute to the world, and just lean into that shit and just go hard for it. You know, there's this scene in the book where Sandra, one of the characters in the book, and who's actually a real person, um, she had met Fela, and they just started having this conversation, and she, you know, she gives him um she lights up his cigarette for him, and it's a very specific shot, right? But the metaphor of that scene was um it it was she was lighting up his inspiration, lighting up this igniting this new version of Fela. And the two times we use ignition in the story, and those are two pivotal parts in the story. So look for something that lights up that fire in you. And it might seem at the start like, oh, maybe this is not profitable, or maybe it's not this, or maybe it's not that. Like, just be the expert on whatever that thing is, and you know, just go 10 toes down deep into it, and you're gonna win, I promise.
Well, Jibola and Conor, I do hate to say, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you both so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. This was great. And I look forward to doing this again with you. Thanks, Kurt.
I'll have you on at any
Yeah.
point in time for sure. For those that want to support this book, where can we find them? Where can we find yourself and anything else you'd like to promote?
Absolutely. So for the Fela Music is the Weapon, go to felagraphicnovel.com to get your copy. Pre-orders are really, really important because they really signal to the book to bookstores that this is something that people actually care about and people want to get. So please pre-order your copy today. It really helps us out because we want to tell more stories like this. And for if you're interested in my art, please go to jibolastudios.com. So that's Jibola studios.com, and Fela Graphic Novels, Fela graphic novel.com.
Thanks so much, Kurt. It was such a great interview. I really appreciate it, man. So if you want to support me, you can find me on Instagram at The Real Conor. I'm on Blue Sky and X, Conor McCreery. I have a Facebook page because I'm ancient. There is a Kill Shakespeare website, and I'll also plug the felagraphicnovel.com website as well. But yeah, thanks so much for talking with us, Kurt. We really appreciate it.
Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You can, of course, find this interview at 1,200 plus others. Definitely the plus is in there because I've lost count after all these years since 2008. On our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast you can find by searching Two Geeks Talking. That's TWO Geeks Talking on your favorite podcast platforms. And of course, as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.